Hi everyone, it's Miss Riley, and you all are about to watch a quick video on the differences between saber and conocer. So let's go ahead and get started. So as you both know, both saber and conocer mean to know. So first we're going to look at some of the uses for saber. Saber can be used for to know, as in to know facts, or to know how to do something. Let's look at a couple of examples. En this first example, Alicia sabe que el examen de español es este jueves. We can use the for a fact to show that saber is the correct verb to use in this sentence. Alicia knows for a fact that the test is on Thursday. Look at the second example. Sabemos que tu novio es Antonio. We know for a fact that your boyfriend is Antonio. In both of these sentences, I can add for a fact and it makes sense. Let's look at the next example. To know how to do something. ¿Sabes jugar al ajedrez? And then my second sentence, ellos saben nadar muy bien. Notice how I have underlined the word how in my translation sentences. Do you know how to play chess? And they know how to swim very well. But notice over here that in Spanish, I do not have a word for how. The how is implied here. And saber is the correct verb. So just sabes jugar by itself means do you know how, and then to play. They know how to swim. So basically, when I have a verb that's in the infinitive, I'm going to have the word how come after. Let's look at the verb conocer. Conocer means to know, but to know people, or to be familiar with. Here's some examples. Ella no sabe a Penelope. She doesn't know Penelope. Penelope here is a person. I could also substitute the to know in this sentence for to be familiar with. She is not familiar with Penelope. ¿Conoces a ella? Do you know her, or are you familiar with her? I can also use conocer for to be familiar with places or with things. Here are two examples. Yo conozco la canción Que hiciste por Jennifer Lopez. So I know, or I'm familiar with the song ¿Qué hiciste? Mis primos conocen New York muy bien. My cousins know, or they are familiar with New York because they're from New York. Notice how I cannot really put for a fact in either of these sentences and they would make sense. So that's another way that you can distinguish the differences between saber and conocer, or know which verb to use. Because if I said here, I know for a fact the song Que hiciste, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. However, saying I'm familiar with that song, that makes a lot more sense. Here are some of the conjugations. The first things that I want you to notice are the yo forms of both of these verbs. This obviously is the verb saber, and over here you've got the verb conocer. Notice the irregularities that are in the yo forms. I suddenly have a z, conozco, in my verb conocer, and then saber is just completely irregular. It's say with an accent. All of the other conjugations, sabe, sabe, conoces, conoce, are completely regular. Okay, let's do a little practice. I'm going to give you about 5 seconds for each sentence to distinguish whether you need to use the verb saber or conocer. So let's start with the first one. Blank, si tenemos un examen hoy. The answer is sabes. And so here's the translation. Do you know for a fact if we have a test today? Number 2, María no blank a mi hermano. The answer here is conoce. María doesn't know my brother. Remember that I could also substitute that for she's not familiar with my brother, and that makes sense. Number 3, yo no blank hablar japonés, pero quiero aprender. The answer here is say, remember that accent. I don't know how, remember how we talked about the word how and how that's implied, to speak Japanese, but I want to learn. 4. Mis estudiantes blank bien el libro of Mice and Men porque lo leemos cada semestre. The answer is conocen. My students know well, or they are really familiar with the book of Mice and Men. Last one. ¿Qué blank nosotros sobre el profesor nuevo? And the answer here is sabemos. What do we know for a fact about the new teacher? Now, number 5 could be kind of tricky because you have profesor, and so most people would say, oh, here's a person, so I'm talking about, do we know the person? But that doesn't really make sense. And then again, remember to try to substitute the familiar with to see if the sentence would make sense. And if I did that, what are we familiar with about the new teacher doesn't really make sense. But saying, what do we know as facts about the new teacher, that makes more sense. So there you go, saber versus conocer.